Hey guys, what is up, and I welcome each and every one of you to a new League of Legends video. Today we'll be taking an early look into patch 9.14 on the PvE server and see what changes Riot has coming for us very soon, and there are quite a lot of big changes. I'll also talk very quickly about some changes coming to TFT at the end of the video. So if you end up enjoying the video or finding it useful, then don't forget to hit that like button, but this video is going to be made and edited by Pro Guides. It's a website that helps you improve your overall League of Legends gameplay and knowledge, and you can now even be coached by a challenger player. The link is below, check it out. So the first thing I want to talk about, and something I'm sure all of us have been waiting for, is the death recap has finally been updated on the PvE server. Now it is supposed to be shipping in patch 9.14, so fingers crossed of course for that, but you can see the screenshots right here. It looks, first of all, much different, but it finally gives you the information that you actually want to know. It'll tell you exactly who hit you for how much damage and all that stuff, how long you received seed for, how much of that was physical, how much it was magical, etc. Right? It's very detailed. It doesn't give you random stats like somehow Dragon's Smite or something like that killed you. It gives you proper, correct, and precise information. So let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of this new updated death recap? But now let's move into the actual changes coming to the champions, the first of which being Ahri. For her charm, it can now cancel in progress dashes, so the first thing that comes to my mind is something like a Lucian's dash or an Akali ultimates, and the damage bonus duration has actually been lowered to 3 seconds rather than 5, so if you hit charm, you better wind up those spells real fast. I think this is a very worthy trade-off for her E ability. I think it's going to actually make it even better personally, so Ahri is going to become an even better pick than she already is. Moving along, we have some changes coming over to Akali finally. Now I did do a full gameplay of these changes, which I recommend checking out if you haven't, but the changes are as follows. The Q ability's AP ratio has been increased by 10%. Her W now has a 25-second cooldown at every single rank rather than going down to 13 by rank 5. The cooldown now starts upon cast rather than after the shroud expires. The energy restored is now 80 period rather than starting at 40 then going up to 80. It no longer can be extended in duration, and the stealth type is now invisibility rather than obscurity. The TLDR of the W changes, well, now you're essentially maxing it last. But then moving on to her E ability, you'll notice here that it now scales off of 35% total AD rather than 70% bonus AD, and it now has a 50% AP ratio as well, with the base damage of course being lowered very slightly. All in all, Akali will be doing a lot more damage now whenever you're actually all-inning, but she'll be a little bit less annoying to deal with or face because her W now isn't as abusable as it once was. Next up, very quickly, we also have Bard's Magical Journey being his E ability, being slightly nerfed, where the movement speed has been changed from starting at 10% going up to 50% to now only being 20% at all ranks. I'll be honest, all this time I didn't even know that it actually makes your allies move faster through the thing, so I mean maybe this won't affect it too much, I'm not entirely sure. Next up, we have a big change coming over to Blitzcrank, which you'll see in other champions as well. His ultimate will now destroy shields on affected enemies. So let's say they have a Janus shield, a Karma shield, and a Lulu shield all in one champion, while a Blitzcrank R will eliminate that shield entirely and then do the damage, I believe. So this is actually pretty damn big, and it's actually going to essentially be a counter pick now towards shielding type champions. And again, there's other champions that have this now as well, which we'll talk about soon. Next up, we also have some changes coming over to Cassiopeia, starting with her W. The minimum and maximum cast range have both been lowered, but I think the minimum cast range being lowered actually might be a buff potentially against melee type champions that are just right on top of her, but the cooldown has also been significantly increased at the earlier ranks. And moving on to her E ability, the healing now scales strictly off of AP rather than having a base scaling based on your actual level with some AP as well. It is also now 25% more effective against minions and small monsters, which is a pretty big plus for her in the lane to sustain a bit more, but the cost has been changed to now just being flat out 50 rather than starting at 40 and going up to 60. So I'm gonna go ahead and go out on a limb and say that this is overall a potential buff for Cassiopeia, because I mean, usually max your W last, right? So the cooldown at the earlier ranks is going to affect you quite hard, but I feel like you can live with that honestly. So I think overall it might be a buff. Next up, we have a quick change coming over to Fizz that I feel like some people might not be very happy about. So it got changed from him just simply reducing damage from basic attacks, right? Similar to a Doran's shield. Now, instead, it actually reduces damage from all sources. 5 plus 1% AP against all sources. Now, I feel like in the laning phase and whatnot, it might actually be a tad worse, but then it also depends on the matchup at the end of the day. But I feel like as you scale and get a bunch of AP, I think this thing can actually start scaling pretty hard. And honestly, this champion will be awkwardly hard to kill mid to late game just because he's taking some random reduced damage literally from everything. So I'm not entirely sure how I feel about this. Let me know down below what you think. Moving along, we have some interesting changes coming over to Galio. Starting off with his passive first, you're gonna notice that no longer does the cooldown on the passive get reduced whenever Galio hits a champion with an ability. But the cooldown now has been lowered down to 5 seconds rather than 8, but the damage actually has been increased a lot, as you can see here, from before being 12 to 80 to now starting at 20 and then going all the way up to 200 damage. And as if that wasn't enough, the MR ratio has also been increased by almost double. In other words, his passive is going to be hitting like an absolute truck. But moving on to his Q ability, you can see here the cooldown has been increased, the cost has actually been lowered, but the damage has also been increased across the board. So just his Q and his passive alone with the damage increase is enough to pretty much call this guy essentially a glass cannon nuke AP champion once again. But moving on to his W, you'll notice here the self slow has been lowered by half, which is great, but, and this is a big but, can no longer use flash while taunting, and the charge can now be interrupted. So the biggest one there is the fact that you can no longer flash a W, which was a very big thing that most Galios will do to catch people off guard. So that is no longer a thing, which is a pretty big nerf. But on the bright side, I mean, you have so much more damage now in your kit, so not really sure which one's more worth it. Moving along, we have a quick buff coming over to Jace's Q ability whenever he's in cannon form, where the damage on this for the base damage has actually been lowered at the earlier ranks, but it ramps up faster to where it's actually more as you rank it up to the final levels, and the scaling has also been increased by 20%. So a little bit of a nerf in the laning phase, but man, it's going to be much stronger as you progress into the game, so he'll scale much better. Next up, very quickly, we have Karma, where her W now also provides true sight during the root component, so she'll just completely have full vision of the target, which is going to be very good for targeted type abilities and just to auto attack in general, and a champion that's going to be going invisible. We also have a quick buff coming to Katarina, where her ultimate's healing reduction has been increased by 20%, but that's about it. Next up, however, we have a fairly decent buff coming over to Kled. I mean, I don't think this champion needs one personally, but his Q ability has a new effect. When yanking an enemy, which is the end part of the Q, it reduces all healing on that target by 60% for 5 seconds, which is insane. This will also make him much more effective against certain top laners like maybe Tryndamere, maybe on the occasional Volibear top lane. So definitely something to watch out for in the next patch. Following this, we also have the same change coming over to LeBlanc's E that we just talked about with Karma's E ability as well, where it now provides true sight on the root component. Next up, we have some changes coming over to Leona. Starting with her Q, the cooldown has been lowered, but the stun on this ability has also been slightly lowered to kind of make up for that, which I don't think is actually worth it. Next up, her W now actually offers a less armor and magic resistance total, but it has a new effect that's similar to Fizz's new passive. It reduces incoming damage by 8 and scaling up to 24 pre-mitigation damage. Now, I think this is actually overall not worth it because if you go Aftershock, well, it's going to make it Aftershock a little bit less effective, but I think overall it's still not too bad. And last but not least, using Leona's ultimate no longer empowers her own basic attack and gives it extra range. Overall, if I had to guess, it seems like they are slight nerfs overall to Leona. Next up, some changes coming to Lux, where her Q ability's cooldown has been increased and the cost has also been set to 50 period rather than starting at 40 and going up to 60. Her W also got nerfed, which is the most abusable part of support Lux, to where now it no longer has a double effect on the returning shield. To make up for this, each one instance of the shield when it goes out and comes back in itself actually shields for overall more. But since it doesn't do a double stack since on the return, it actually does ×2, that actually means that the overall shield is less. So in other words, the shield that will be coming out will actually shield for more than the current shield that comes out from her initially, but on the return, since it doesn't do a double, it actually shields for less, which overall means overall less shield. On top of this, the shield duration has also been slightly lowered. So yes, in case you're confused, it is an overall nerf. And last but not least, her ultimate Final Spark no longer does it have a reset mechanic. The AP ratio has actually been increased by 25%, which is ridiculous. It's at 100% right now, and the cooldown has also been lowered. So a lot less ults are going to be spammed by Lux, but when it hits, it's going to hit quite hard. Moving along, we also have the Malphite mini rework, which I've talked about several times, so I'm not going to be talking over once again very in depth. So very quickly, his passive has a new visual effect, his Q ability is overall a little bit faster to get to the target, his W is now essentially a spell in its own where it has extra damage similar to Lichbane on top of the other effects it already has, and his ultimate has a new visual effect. Morgana has a new buff now where her ultimate also provides true sight on the root component. We also have some massive buffs to Poppy's W to where now if Poppy's W stops the movement ability, that enemy is also grounded and slowed by 25% for 2 seconds. That is absolutely ridiculous, and now she is the ultimate counter to dash type champions. Next up, some pretty big changes coming to Pike once again. Starting with his E, it now stuns non-champions, but it still does no damage to them. But his ultimate is where the big changes are. So the base damage that his ultimate now deals is overall lowered, and it scales a lot slower now as well. But it scales much harder off of the AD. So it now scales off of 200% AD rather than 80% and 200% lethality rather than 150% lethality. But it deals 50% reduced damage to enemies it does not kill, so you better land those ultimates properly. But now when Pike gets a kill with his ultimate, he gets a your cut little coin thing in your inventory as well as the ally on top of the gold he already got for killing the character as well. And if his ultimate is an assist rather than the kill, Pike now gets 2 of those your cut coins in his inventory rather than just 1. So all in all, his ultimate is getting some insane buffs. I mean, absolutely ridiculous buffs, especially if you actually build damage and lethality, so it's pretty ridiculous. Next up, Renekton also has the same effect that Blitzcrank had with his ultimate, where above 50 Fury, his W also instantly destroys all existing shields on a target. And next up, we also have the mini rework coming over to Swain, which I have a full gameplay of. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend you do so. His passive can now infinitely store soul fragments, and each single one increases his max HP by 5, and collecting a soul also restores a percent of his mana. His Q ability also has a little bit less range, but it actually goes through all minions and actually only stops on champions now, which is pretty sweet. And his R can now be cast regardless of the amount of soul fragments you have, and it doesn't actually empower the damage. Instead, it actually doubles the HP you get per soul fragment instead, so that's pretty good. But the damage it now deals on the second part of his ultimate is equal to just how much health Swain has drained during the first part of his ultimate, where he's draining everyone's HP around him. All in all, in my opinion, some pretty good buffs coming to Swain. Following this, we also have kind of like a mini revert to Pike's changes. So starting off with this passive, the minion damage reduction has been lowered to 50%, so it's actually even weaker to minions, but the damage on his Q has overall been increased. You can now also use your W on large monsters to heal, which is fantastic for jungle Silas. His E ability has a shield now on the first cast of the E, but it's only a magic absorbing shield, so something to keep in mind. And the second part of his E is much faster to throw out the missile, which is going to be much easier to land. But his ultimate got some nerfs to where now Silas can't hold the ultimate as long anymore. The AD ratio and the total AD ratio conversion has been completely changed to being a little bit less, and the cooldown has been significantly increased, especially at the later ranks, so he can't just reuse 5 ultimates in a single teamfight at level 16. So let me know what you think about these Silas changes down below. And the final change is going to be towards Tahm. His passive now scales better off of his max HP, but doesn't deal bonus damage based on stacks. His Q ability now actually removes all stacks of his passive whenever you stun a target, but at least the slow duration and stun duration has been slightly increased. His W can now be used on jungle monsters like blue buff and red buff, which is great for jungle Tahm if it happens, and his E ability stores a lot less damage taken as gray health, but he heals for 100% now. Also very quickly, next patch TFT, we have the rank system coming out, we have Twisted Fate, which is a new character coming out, and apparently we also have a bunch of new quality of life UI changes like damage done. And last but not least, we have Demacia, Vice Garen, and Lucian coming out next patch as well. But that's it for this video, guys. There you have it, a bunch of changes, huge patch. Let me know what you think about it down below, but thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.